Yo, what up? It's Deuce, Red Zone the Lab Podcast. And today, joining us, a friend of the podcast, Mark Bullock, NFL analyst. He's going to talk to us about Terry, Jahan, Curtis Samuel. He also going to tell us what makes Terry McLaurin great and what are some of his weaknesses. Yes, Terry McLaurin does have weaknesses. We also going to talk about which skill player is going to benefit the most and about the screen game. Can we at least see one screen that's ran to perfection and how EB can hide any O-line issues that we may have. Next up, Mark Bullock, NFL analyst.
This is Hog Farmer Chris and the 2022 Commanders Fan of the Year. Before you listen to Red Zone in the Lab podcast, I want to thank you for your support and bringing awareness to the Hog Farmers Charitable Foundation, which helps children and their families affected by pediatric cancer. You truly make a difference. And with that being said, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube.
Welcome back to Red Zone in the Lab podcast. I am Deuce, and entering the lab today is a friend of the podcast, NFL analyst Mark Bullock. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. So how is it over there on the other side of the pond there, I may say?
It's been quite warm lately. We've had a bit of a heat wave, so summer's finally kicked in. It was quite wet through most of spring, but we finally got some nice weather. And now, of course, being British, we complained it's too hot now. So, but there, it's pretty nice change.
Yeah, cool, man. Yeah, it's summer's about to kick off, I guess, tomorrow or sometime today in some weird time. But yep, it's getting there. It hasn't been too humid or hot here, but I'm sure it's going to pick up. But yeah, thanks for joining us today. Let's talk about some Commanders. And EB is here. We're going to talk some offense today. To try to see who's going to benefit the most. The impact of what the wide receivers can have and Bieniemy type offense. But Mark, my first question, like from my understanding, EB was responsible for the run game over there in Kansas City, and we just don't know what his playbook is going to look like. Just from your film study on Kansas City and EB, give us an overview of what you think his playbook may look like.
So I hadn't heard that you were just responsible for the run game. My understanding, it's quite a collaborative effort over in Kansas City, and Bieniemy was kind of Andy Reid's right-hand man, and they put the game plan together, and then they would talk together during the game and between series and decide, hey, this is something we saw on film that in this situation we like this call, and so they collaborate on it, and then Reid was the one making the ultimate final decision, but it was Bieniemy that would then relay that, and it would be quite a collaborative effort. So I think we can expect not too dissimilar offense than what the Chiefs had. Obviously, you don't have the same players running it, so you might not necessarily have the same success, and you can't have the magic that Mahomes brought off script, and you can't have the what Travis Kelce brings in his ability to get open and find space and go off script and seemingly have that kind of telepathic connection with Mahomes. You can't replicate that with what they have in Washington, but you can replicate the game planning in terms of understanding opponents' tendencies, understanding their coverages, and not just what the coverage is. It's not just, hey, they run cover 4 in this situation. It's what are their rules in this situation? Do they have when they face 3-by-1 sets? If you got 3 receivers on one side of the field, how does that change their coverage structure? And then how can we attack that? How can we exploit that? And so I suspect they can bring a lot of that over, and they'll be looking to be kind of quite a classical West Coast offense. And a lot of the stuff that what the Chiefs did last year was it was very typical West Coast offense stuff, where it was quick game, getting the ball out on time and in rhythm, very good game planning and understanding what concepts will work in what situation, giving Mahomes a very good structure to work within the structure, and then giving him the sort of permission and the freedom that when things break down, or if he likes a certain look, he can kind of go off script and create his own plays as well. So I don't know whether Howell will get that freedom necessarily, but I think the other stuff where they provide the good structure and they call the right plays in the right situation and give Howell some quick reads where he can get the ball out on time and kind of efficiently. I think that's the kind of offense we're going to see.
When it comes to players within this offense, let's look at Curtis Samuel. When I see Curtis Samuel, I kind of envision Tyreek Hill. And I always say in the spaces where Mark kind of, joins us from time to time, look, we have to stop comparing everything to the Chiefs and Kelsey and Patrick Mahomes just because EB came from there. But that's all we kind of have when it comes down to EB. But what type of role do you see Curtis Samuel playing within this offense?
I think for me, the comparison would be more what Kadarius Toney did when he was traded to the Chiefs last year. Kind of that, I don't want to limit him to a kind of gadget guy per se, but that's what people describe that role as, where he's taking jet sweeps and doing the end arounds and reverses, and you're moving him around, lining him in the backfield, or lining him up in the slot one play, outside next play, backfield next play, and creating mismatches that way, and letting him make use of that elite kind of quickness that he has, the ability to get in and out of cuts real quick. And either you're having him in the slot and you're letting him run those quick little whip routes where he breaks inside and cuts back out, or he breaks outside and cuts back in and wins really quickly, and you get him the ball early and let him work after the catch like that. Or you do those things where you kind of move him around and try to get him the ball in space. So maybe you line him up in the backfield and try to get him matched up on a linebacker and have him run a wheel route. Or maybe you send him on those kind of jet sweeps or move him into the backfield and run a kind of swing screen for him where he's getting the ball out in space and he can make use of his explosive playmaking ability. I think that's the kind of stuff they did with Toney last year. And I think that's the kind of stuff I would suspect they'll do with Curtis Samuel.
Jahan Dotson, he showed a lot of promise last year. He came out looking really good with Carson Wentz. He looked pretty good with Taylor Heineke. In this offense, what do you think Jahan Dotson is going to bring?
Yeah, I think he's an interesting one because Curtis Samuel is going to be the guy that they want to do the kind of gadget stuff with, where he's in the slot and moving around. I think Jahan Dotson is kind of a guy that probably suits playing inside a little bit more. He's got that ability to win quickly, and obviously, if you're moving, there's only so many guys you can move around on any given play, and there's certainly plenty of opportunities to put Jahan Dotson in the slot, and something that they kind of came to last year when they went to empty sets. They put Dotson in the slot on the weak side, and he would run an option route, and he won inside pretty quickly every time they did that, and he was picking up some big gains doing that. So that's kind of something that I think they will look to do is get him inside and let him sort of like Samuel win with his quickness, but more with sharp route running. But also Dotson is really good with timing in and out of his breaks and making his cuts on time. So things outside the numbers as well, things like curl routes. There was a good rep with Sam Howell in that Cowboys game last year where he ran a curl route and it timed up real nice. And so there was some sort of connection there where Howell, he delivered that ball before Dotson made his break, trusting him to make that break, and Dotson made it on time, and Howell put it on his outside shoulder, allowing him to kind of turn back up the field and down the sideline to get some extra yards. So those are the kind of things where it's kind of quick timing stuff, or kicking him inside to the slot and then letting him use his quickness and his route running ability to win routes quickly.
So Terry McLaurin, we in Commander Land, or however you want to say it, we think he's an elite wide receiver, but we do understand that the touchdowns has to come, the ability to, make the big plays, which we know, the reasons why he wasn't able to. You talk about that contested catch stat. Like, I hate that stat, Mark. I absolutely hate it because I see him and I understand why it's being contested, right? Because of the underthrows. But is this an offense with EB? And EB talked about spreading the ball around, not caring about stats and individual stats. He just wants to win. Do you think Terry McLaurin can take that next step to be in a conversation of the elite wide receivers in this offense?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Yes, I'm sure they're looking to spread the ball around, but I think there'll be plenty of balls to go around to different receivers, and it's not like nobody's looking at Travis Kelce in the Chiefs offense and going,
He
is
had
he getting the ball
150
often
targets
enough?
last year.
So exactly. So there'll be enough targets for McLaurin. I think he will still have some of those stuff down the field with the isolation stuff. If you have him on the backside of a trip set of a 3x1, you kind of match him up one-on-one with a corner. We saw that beautiful deep ball that Sam Howell hit him on in that Cowboys game. That was a situation where they had him isolated on a corner one-on-one, and they kind of let Howell have the freedom to take that shot, and he obviously showed why they had that trust in him to have that freedom, and McLaurin went and made a good play, and it was nice, and I think that's certainly stuff they could look to do plenty of. But I also think with the kind of emphasis going to be more on quick game and getting the ball out quickly and efficiently, I think even things like slant routes, speed outs, stuff like that you can run off of RPOs and stuff where Howell is reading one defender and deciding whether to throw or hand it off, making that kind of stuff easier for him. McLaurin's going to win on that. McLaurin's excellent on slants. He gets inside and wins consistently, and he can obviously he'll win speed outs as well, and he'll win all those underneath routes, and he's physical enough after the catch that if you hit him on that 5-yard slant, he can turn that into a 10, 15, 20-yard gain after the catch. So I think there's plenty of stuff that McLaurin can do within this offense, and people have talked about moving him inside to the slot a little bit more. Obviously, I just mentioned with Samuel and Jahan Dotson, there's only so many times you can put someone inside to the slot. There's only so many spaces for that, and there are certainly times that they will do that, but I think the slot will be more for Samuel and Dotson, but there will certainly be plenty of stuff for McLaurin, and I don't see any reason why he can't be a number one receiver in this offense.
What are some of Terry's weaknesses?
He can still get jammed sometimes in press coverage. He's gotten a lot better at that, but sometimes he's a little bit undersized in terms of what if you built a receiver on Madden, you'd want them to be like 6'4", 6'5", and Terry McLaurin's 6 foot. So, and that's plenty of size. Like Pierre Garçon was the same, and he was tenacious and stuff. But sometimes he just gets caught a little bit on the line of scrimmage. He can be a little bit sloppy with coming out of his breaks. Sometimes it's not always perfectly sharp. It could sometimes be a little bit rounded, but in general, that's being very nitpicky. In general, he's a very good route runner. Obviously, he has the real good deep speed. He's physical after the catch. You talked about the contested catch stuff. He's very good going up and contesting catches. The one thing coming out of college was always the big question was his hands, because he catches the ball. Yeah, he catches the ball kind of unconventionally, where he's not presenting his hands like a normal catch. He's kind of seal clapping to catch the ball, and it's
seal clapping. Never heard of that one.
It's like it's not typically a very successful way of catching the ball, but it works for him, obviously, and he's done well so far. Like he's already established himself as one of the better receivers in the league. So maybe if you're being nitpicky, there's stuff like that you can pick on, but overall, I think he's just a very, very good, well-rounded receiver.
We know our O-line had some issues last year. We know Kansas City had also had issues in the past within the last few years, and still was successful. How does EB, or how would EB kind of maximize the offensive line, or even hiding some of their weaknesses to give them the illusion that they are being productive?
Yeah, so I think the plan to me seems to be the profile of offensive linemen that they've gone for this offseason. And granted, not every one of them is going to be a starter, but Andrew Wiley's obviously going to be a starter. He's a very athletic guy, maybe better of a guard profile, but he's going to play right tackle. Sam Cosmi is going to kick inside to guard. He's very athletic. They signed Nick Gates, who isn't an amazing athlete, but for a center, he's a good athlete. Then they drafted Stromberg, who again is a very good athlete as a center. They drafted Daniels, who's an extremely good athlete, even at left tackle. So they've clearly targeted athletic offensive linemen because they want to be able to make use of that athleticism. I would imagine with the run game being kind of zone heavy and using some play actions off of that, but also building in a lot of RPOs. And when you have that kind of athletic offensive lineman, they can spread the pocket pretty quickly with they can get out on with quick sets and engage in their blocks early and not have to worry if you're running quick game stuff, which is why I think they're going to be a very quick game, get the ball out very early, not very many 7-step drops, waiting in the pocket 5 seconds for multiple receivers to run down the field. I think it's going to be more based about getting the ball out quickly and efficiently and allowing those 3 receivers we talked about to make some plays after the catch. And when you're looking to get the ball out early, obviously the offensive line only has to protect for so long. So they can be more aggressive. They can use their quick sets to engage with blocks early, take away defensive linemen's kind of initial rush plan and force them to go to a backup move. And by the time they've kind of engaged in that backup move, the ball should be out. So, and then obviously you have, as I said, play actions and RPOs where you're kind of telling the offensive line to run block and hoping that the defensive line doesn't pick up that there's a pass option or it is a play action pass. And that kind of buys some time for the quarterback and helps your offensive line a little bit. So I think there's certainly plenty of things that Bieniemy can do to kind of mask what the kind of deficiencies that they have on the offensive line. And I think the kind of athletic profile that they've targeted suggests that that's kind of the way they're going to go about it, is the kind of RPOs, the play action stuff, and the quick game to kind of mask how often to limit how often those offensive linemen are having to really protect deep 7-step drops.
Before we get started with the podcast, I want you all to go check out You Grow Girl. That's Grow, Grow, written by a dear friend of mine, Jay Smith. It's for daily affirmations for Black women. It is filled with beautiful, colorful images of Black women and powerful affirmations. You can find it at Amazon at Amazon.com. So we probably had more successful punts than we had screens last year. It seems like, Andy Reid is just elite at screens. He's masterful. Don't know what EB is going to bring, but what type of screens do you see this team being able to produce to be effective with EB coming here?
Yeah, well, I think that plays into that athletic profile of offensive linemen that they were targeting. Last year, they had a few guys, like Sam Cosmi was on the offensive line and is an athletic guy, but he was playing right tackle. And then it was the older guys like Turner and Norwell at guards that they're not bad players per se necessarily, but they aren't, they're not the most athletic and they kind of struggle to eat up space and get out in front of blocks and set up screens well. So some of the screen designs they had last year, the actual designs were fine. They just didn't have the linemen that could get out and make the blocks. Whereas this year, by targeting those kind of athletic guys, kicking Cosmi inside to guard, you've got Wiley at right tackle, who's athletic enough to get out on screens. Gates is athletic enough. Either Sadiq Charles or Chris Paul, whoever wins that left guard spot, they're both athletic and can get out on screens. The only real one that you'd have some questions about would be Charles Leno at left tackle. So they've really upgraded in how athletic that offensive line is going to be. And that should enable them to set up some more screens because the linemen have the ability to get out in front So I think we'll see some more screens, and it will be probably a lot more of the kind of running back screens where the Chiefs did a lot of different things where they were motioning guys around and giving a lot of misdirection, trying to get defenders looking right, looking left, and then thinking, okay, we've got to get back into coverage. And once they're kind of disorientated, suddenly they realize, oh, it's actually just a swing to the running back. So there's a lot of misdirection and a lot of kind of smoke and mirrors, but in the end, it is just screens to the running back that they do, and they kind of blow a load of smoke around it with different misdirection things, with motions and receivers going all over the place and stuff. But the main thing that's going to improve is the fact that they've got that athletic profile of linemen that are able to get out in front and make the blocks on the screen, because they have the guys with the ability to pick up yards. They've got, as we talked about, McLaurin, Samuel, Dotson, even Antonio Gibson out of the backfield. They've got some real explosive athletes. They have to be able to block the first wave of guys getting there. And once you make those first few blocks, then it's up to the receiver to, make maybe the last safety or the corner or whatever miss, and then they can make a big play. So, but the offensive line have got to make that first wave of blocks first, and hopefully with the athletes they have up front now, then they'll be more successful in that.
So I have one more question, but I do want to ask you a question. I don't want you to think. Just tell me the first thing comes to your mind when I say at OTAs they were running 14 personnel.
14 personnel. So you mean one running back, 4 tight ends, and no receivers? I mean, yeah, the trend in the NFL now is if you bring in more tight ends, defenses have to adjust by going to base personnel or even a run-heavy personnel, and then you can spread out the defense and find your mismatch. And so if you have tight ends that are capable receivers like Logan Thomas, like Cole Turner, Armani Rogers before he got hurt, those kind of guys, then you get a bunch of safeties and linebackers on the field trying to defend them, and not as many corners. So you can try and create mismatches that way. So it's a little surprising to hear 4 rather than 3, but the Chiefs certainly used a lot of 13 personnel, and did that same thing where they'd line up in a run-heavy formation with 3 tight ends on one side of the line and 1 receiver to the other side, and then they'd run like 4 verticals out of it and lots of different passing concepts just for that matchup issue. So I think that would be the kind of idea in hand. If you're going 14 personnel, that's just, I guess, the next step of it.
So you might be writing up some of that this upcoming season. So I want to give you a heads up, Mike.
Thank you.
Before we get into which player do you believe is going to have the biggest impact in this offense, what would a back like someone like Kareem Hunt bring to the offense?
Yeah, that one's an interesting one to me. The link to Kareem Hunt, to me, it doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense because they kind of have their 3 guys. It's gonna, in my head, it was going to be Brian Robinson is going to be your workhorse back. Antonio Gibson's going to be your third down back in the kind of the J.D. McKissic role or the Chris Thompson role that we know from years past. And then Chris Rodriguez was going to kind of spell Brian Robinson from time to time, maybe do some of that Peyton Barber role with the 4th down stuff and short yardage stuff, or on the goal line and that kind of thing. But I felt like that was kind of all their bases covered, really. So for them to go into Kareem Hunt potentially, and obviously that could just be, we've checked in with him, and if someone gets injured in training camp, then we need a guy. Then obviously he makes a lot of sense because of his history with Bieniemy. But he's kind of a guy that, from my memory, I haven't studied him recently, but from my memory, he's obviously a hard runner, but he runs well between the tackles. He runs well on the zone scheme, which is what I think they're going to lean heavily into. And he's also a decent threat out of the backfield, has decent hands. And so he could kind of cover either the role that they're going to have Gibson play or the role that Brian Robinson's going to play. So in that regard, I guess he'd be solid cover. Or if one of them gets hurt, then he would make a lot of sense. But until they get an injury, I feel like right now they have a lot of bases covered, and they don't really need to go to what would presumably be a relatively expensive veteran rather than, Jonathan Williams or whoever it is they have as their kind of fourth or fifth guy, Jarrett Patterson or whatever. I would imagine, unless they get a significant injury and feel like they don't have Brian Robinson for the whole year or something like that. And obviously, hopefully that doesn't happen. Right. But if that were to happen, then that would be the situation where maybe Kareem Hunt makes more sense.
All right. In the show, which skill position player, outside of the quarterback, I guess they're skill position players now. The NFL is changing so much, but outside of the quarterback, which skill position player you think it will benefit the most from having Eric Bieniemy?
I was asked this question the other day, and my immediate thought was possibly Curtis Samuel, because he's going to be used more. We saw Curtis Samuel have a really good start to the season last year. He had a real good connection with Carson Wentz, and him and Jahan Dotson were the two kind of heavily featured guys. And McLaurin was he got attention from the defense, and he got an extra safety kind of rotating his way, and that opened space up underneath for Samuel and Dotson. And Samuel took advantage of that. But after Wentz went down, they kind of went away from that package of stuff where Samuel was moving around a lot and playing in the backfield and taking some handoffs and that kind of thing. I think he will see more of that package kind of more frequently. So he'll benefit from that. But I tend to think they'll all kind of benefit because it's an offense that is going to be predicated around quick game and spreading the ball around and finding the open receiver. And that if they're able to replicate that kind of structure, as I talked about earlier, where they are game planning well, they're understanding the tendencies and the rules of the defense and how to exploit those, then the first or second read is going to be open more often than not. And then it's up to them to make yards after the catch. So the guys that are good yards after the catch, and all three of those receivers are good after the catch. So those are the guys that should benefit in my mind.
Good. Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Please plug your Substack. I've been subscribed for, I think, 2 years now. It's great. I use it all the time. I reference it in spaces. I sound really smart when I reference it, and anytime I post it, I always trying to plug their Substack. I think it's great, but please plug it here, Mark.
Yeah, so my Substack is just markbullock.substack.com, and you can subscribe on there, and you get a couple of breakdowns a week. During the season, it's a lot more. During the off season, it's a little bit quieter spell, but it's usually a couple of breakdowns a week of different things to do with the Commanders. Sometimes it's an individual player, sometimes it's a play that they've run, sometimes it's a whole scheme or a whole package of plays, or it's a bunch of different breakdowns, both offense and defense, and all sorts of players. So that's what I'm doing on markbullock.substack.com, and you can check it out and see if that's the kind of thing you like.
Yep, it will be the kind of thing you like. And sometimes he puts it out for everyone to see, but stop being cheap. Subscribe to the Substack. Again, thank you, Mark, so much for joining. We look forward to having you again sometime soon. Please stay safe. All of you out there, we thank you so much for watching. We thank you for listening. I am Deuce. Remember, do it because you love it, not because it loves you. One beat, one sound, one heart, one love.
Thank you for listening to Red Zone in the Lab podcast. Please subscribe to YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Remember, do it because you love it, not because it loves you. One beat, one sound, one heart, one love.